It's a pleasure to be here today with all of you this morning. Thanks to all of you for making it here and making this event possible. A couple of days back, somebody messaged me a couple of plans and asked me if I could draw an elevation. Sadly, a lot of people think that the job of an architect is merely to make buildings look nice, whether from the outside or the inside. Fortunately, over decades, there's been a lot of progress in the understanding of how spaces have significant impact on us. In architecture schools, we are taught the history of architecture as a history of styles. And sometimes I must confess that at times, we do tend to get preoccupied with appearances rather than performance. And so the idea of the conference was to hear and discuss more about the impact that architecture has. And we thought it would be beneficial to focus on one particular kind of building: schools. Schools are where the foundations of our nation are being built, where the country's future is being made. They are places whose very existence is about transformation and the shaping of people. And so we thought it only made sense to focus on schools. And we felt it didn't make much sense to talk about school buildings without talking about education. How many of you have studied in schools that were somewhat like this, with chairs facing a wall and a teacher facing you, where conversations are meant to be mostly unidirectional? Sadly, this is how most schools are. As you can see, that almost all of us studied in schools that are quite similar to this. And you can see how congested it is, and how there's little space for a teacher to walk around. How it's very conducive for the existence of a backbench. Incidentally, this is a school that I visited in London. It's a museum now. It was built in 1877, and it's almost exactly the same of all of our schools. A lot has changed, yet the school classroom is more or less the same. Next. Recently, there was a film in which a teacher proposed this arrangement of a classroom. And then suddenly it was in the news, and then we had schools across Kerala talking about rearranging the classroom. I was both happy and sad. Sad that policy change happens through films, and happy that there's some change happening. I'd like to talk a little bit about this. Unlike the previous arrangement, there's no backbench. It completely negates the possibility of a backbench, of the possibility of passing chits or losing attention, or the teacher not being able to see what's happening all around the class. Here, the teacher has one-on-one eyesight and focus on all in the class. And it's quite conducive to have a conversation, a debate, a discussion. And if you're talking about critical thinking, then it's not you, the teacher, talking to the students alone. It's the students talking to each other. You can see each other's facial expressions. Each time I see the previous picture, I'm reminded of my maths class, where the teacher's solving problems in the front. She'd ask what this answer is. The smart kids are answering, and a bunch of us are lost, wondering what's happening. And often that's because the teacher doesn't walk around, because there isn't space to walk around. And there's often the case where there's an introverted child who is quiet and hesitant to ask questions. And the congested, crammed classroom with bags in the aisles doesn't allow for a teacher to come close to the student, to engage with the student, to find out what's happening, to answer a question, to ask if everything is okay. This is a classroom from 1940, designed by Elil and Airo Saranan, and it's an L-shaped classroom. You can see a diagram there. Each classroom has a pocket of garden space. It has this anti-space where you can store things, where a teacher can have a private conversation. And this is 1940. Next. This is the larger layout of the school, and you can see how each class has its own outdoor yard. Next. This is the school that was built in 1972. You can see that in the plan that it doesn't have a classroom, an enclosed classroom for each class. Instead of that, they have a cluster where there's a large space with a mix of furniture that allows for all sorts of kinds of sessions to happen. And this again is 1972. Next. This is a school from 1955, at the time of integration between blacks and whites in schools in America. And they lifted the whole school 1 floor high to create this large, expansive space for kids to have interactions, to play in the shade. Next. So Jonathan Haidt talks about the access generation, about how social skills, empathy, emotional intelligence is developed through one-on-one real-time face-to-face interactions. And he talks about how conversations on group chat, on WhatsApp, don't allow the emotional, social intelligence that are created when you have real conversations face-to-face, and where you can see the student reacting to a joke that didn't work, and people laughing and giggling and engaging in conversations as a group. Next. This is a plan of a school done by Hertzberger in 1966, and the gray shaded part is the common areas, the circulation, the so-called corridors that we often have in school, and you can see the expansive space that it has. Again, you can see the classroom is L-shaped. There are levels in the classes, 2 areas where you can have different things happening. You can engage with different kinds of students in different ways. And Hertzberger talks a lot about the public space in schools and how it's important. It's almost like a city, and how it's important to create the provisions. Next. For activities to spill out of the classroom, for interaction and events, and to happen in the common areas, and for the classrooms and the spaces to be designed so that it becomes easier for a teacher to say, okay, let's step out and engage in a different way. Next. This is a much more recent school in 2011. It's the Vittra School Telephone Plan in Stockholm. And you can see that, next, there's all sorts of arrangements of spaces, quite unconventional. And the idea is that learning doesn't happen. There's different modes of learning, and there's different ways you can engage with students. And there are different ways that students need to engage with each other. And they require different settings. Next. And this is the plan. And you can see that there's obviously no fixed rectangular classroom, 6 by 6 or 8 by 8, whatever CBSE prescribes. And I like to talk a little bit about that. It's often, as architects, when we get school clients, they come to us saying that CBSE says, or this board says so-and-so size classroom, so-and-so rooms. But I just want to clarify that these boards in India are administrative bodies. Their demand is to administer and manage education across the country, where there are schools in villages, in forests, and in urban cities. And so when they set the rules, they set it to the minimum. It is not, this is excellence, this is what's required for excellence. And we can't afford to be seeing these stipulated board regulations as the ideal, which is often what people assume, that CBSE says this, and therefore this is what's best. Next. This is a school closer in Bangalore, and you can see this space here and that space there. So the idea is that you don't have one large classroom, one large space. You have pockets of spaces where kids of different natures, who maybe where you need to have a more private conversation with a kid, or where there are introverted kids, or the fact that you need to have different engagements or activities in the class. Next. It needs differentiated space and not one singular large space. Next. That was the plan of the classroom. It's not very clear. Next. This is a school in Bangladesh, done in a very mere budget by Anna Heringer. And this is a space where kids have completely taken as their own. And you can imagine them sitting there in the break and imagining themselves in worlds, in imaginary worlds, and having fun. And it's important that people are comfortable. We all know this, that you perform better when you're comfortable. Next. This is a school done by Biome in Coimbatore. And I think one thing that strikes me in all these images is playfulness. I can imagine if there were 10 kids going down that corridor, at least a couple of them won't walk on a straight line, and they're following that snake, or they're imagining it's a river. But if you look at the bodily postures in all these pictures, and I can imagine a kid who's studied in such a school for 12 years has a different notion to what it is to sit on a floor. Probably to them, it is not a posture or a setting for just the maids or the drivers. There is, especially in a place like India, sitting on the floor and these are cultural. but often what we have is, so even the sense of what is it to sit sophisticatedly is different, would be different in this, depending on the setting that you're grown up in. But also, there are studies to say just sitting in a seat for the whole day is very unhealthy. And I've listened to a speech where the person said it's as bad as smoking or even worse. Is the fact that you have to sit in the way the chairs are designed, and the fact, and that sitting is not something that is meant for humans to sit for long hours in a day. And yet, I think sit straight is a question, is a statement that we're also used to. Next. This is a school done by Sanjay Mohan, and there's a lot about how the spaces extend out. There's opportunities for the classrooms to extend out. There's greenery, and there's a lot about the effects of light and greenery, to the point that in terms of health, in terms of cognition, is supposedly having views. So there's this 1984 study of an ICU where there was one ICU which had a window to a garden, and the other one was a window to a blank wall. And patients who were treated in the ICU with the window took lesser medication, 30% lesser pain medication, and were discharged earlier than the other patient. And it's just windows that face the garden. So there's a huge amount of information that we now know about the tremendous impact that natural light and nature has. Next. And this is just to say that, like, if you want kids to play, if you want them to play even when it's raining outside, there are certain provisions that you need to give, whether it's, and the idea of unstructured play. Next. Indoor play areas. Next. And it's if you want to prioritize something, whether it's labs or tinkering or music or debate or innovation. Next. There needs to be a space for it. Gardening, libraries, and museums. Like the idea that the whole school could be a museum, where there's pride in that you get pride and ownership in just being able to present your work. The idea of expression as schools becoming a place for expression, where you feel valued. Next. So in some sense, I was just trying to give you an overview. It's not a comprehensive presentation of the best schools in the world so far. It was just to give you an overview that a lot has been done with schools. Yet, sadly, we see the same kind of classrooms across the country, predominantly. There's a chapter in Atomic Habits which is just about environment. And he says in the book that environment trumps motivation, that if you set the environment in a certain way, that it has a better impact on your habits than even your own self-motivation. Next. Research in architecture has enabled us to be able to simulate movement. So this is an existing building, a museum, and these are options that various architects had produced. And this is a space syntax-based simulation of where movement is likely to happen and which places are more likely to be used, which spaces would be more where you find more footfall. So we now know how to give them a map and simulate and find out where people are going to move. And we know very well that if there's something that's more accessible, that it's more likely it's going to be used. We all know that if you have your phone next to you, you look at it every few minutes. If you put the phone 2 rooms away and you say you have to go there and come back each time, you'll use it less. So the question is, what do we want people to use more often? What people, what objects, what values, what relations do we value, and how do we get them to be closer so that they're used more, or they're used more. And there's also the idea of attractors, that you can put the toilet anywhere and people will always go there. So then how do you combine this understanding of the distribution of people that the arrangement of space creates in combination with the possibilities that attractors have? Next. So James Gibson talks about the idea of affordances, and I'll read it from the screen. Affordance refers to the qualities of an object that indicate how it can be used, providing clues for interaction. These can be physical or digital cues, such as a door handle suggesting it can be pulled, or a button icon suggesting it can be clicked. So the idea is that, like for example, a knife has different affordances, there are different possibilities. It depends on the object as well as the user at that point of time and how he's going to use it. So in some sense, as architects, what we're all primarily, or in what essentially doing is we're creating affordances, the appropriate affordances for activities, for relationships, for values. Next. And then there's the idea of association. So that's the Wimbledon trophy. And I don't know if you've noticed there's a pineapple on the top. And you'll all be wondering, why is it a pineapple on top of the Wimbledon trophy? And that's because long time back, the pineapple was a very prestigious fruit. It was a tropical fruit in England, and to have a pineapple was a status symbol. So they would put a pineapple on the dining table in a glass case as a status symbol. And that's how it reaches the top of the Wimbledon trophy. And if you start paying attention, you'll find the pattern of the pineapple is found across a lot of buildings that we have. And it all comes from this association that the pineapple was at some point a matter of esteem. So there's this idea of association. So in some sense, as architects, a lot of what we're doing is creating the associations and the affordances for various things. Next. I assume you've all heard of behavioral economics and how your decisions can be affected by the choices that you're given. Many of us probably know Starbucks. You give the small at 50 and you put the large at 60, and you'll say, okay, I'll go for the largest, so it's 10 rupees. So behavior economics is about affecting people's choices. And so Daniel Kahneman, I used to think that we were all rational, but then Daniel Kahneman's whole book is about how we are extremely biased and we're not rational. And you can get even the most senior of scientists, and you can frame questions, and they'll give you answers that are not scientifically, logically, statistically valid. So Kahneman talks about the system 1 and system 2 thinking. So if I said 1 plus 1 without thinking, you all know it's 2. But if I say 56 into 56, you have to look up and probably think for a while. So 1 plus 1 activates system 1 thinking, and the other one activates system 2 thinking. So the idea is that, one, that we're not rational, that our decisions are significantly impacted by the way our brain is configured and designed, and it's designed for an ease of operation. That you identify something with 4 legs and a platform as a table, and then everywhere you go, you can quickly identify it. And you don't have to take the pain each time you see something to say, okay, is this a table? Is it a chair? Is it going to come attack me? No, that's not how it works. So the brain requires us to create these patterns and be able to move about quickly based on these patterns. So in some sense, the pattern need not be exactly accurate, and therefore we become biased. And so if I walked around with a full sleeve shirt and a jacket, you would have an assumption about me. If I wear a dhoti, you'd have an assumption. That's basically you invoking your biases. And Daniel Kahneman, in one of his studies, he shows how he can identify who's going to get a job, not by looking at the interview or the candidates, by interviewing the interviewees. And he says, we're so biased that you can study it and you can identify, you can decide who's going to win the interview by just paying attention, by observing the people doing the interviews. So he's done this, not necessarily he, but in his book he talks about this exercise where he gets people to put pencils in their mouth and ask questions. And essentially what's happening is by putting your pencil in the mouth in that position, you're making the person smile. And what they found out is that when you smile and give those answers, your answers are different from the other answers, and you're not even aware that you're smiling. So the point is that you can, in some sense, trick your body. So postures, expressions. So we conventionally think that you have emotions and those emotions are expressed to the body, but it's also the other way around, that you can smile and then the body catches up and says, okay, I need to release oxytocin. There seems to be something that's happy. And then it releases the positive hormone and you start feeling happy. So it works both ways, is something that they've realized. Something else Kahneman talks about is the idea of moments, which I thought is very relevant for. And so he says your memory of an experience is not the full experience. It is you remember them through moments. So if you've watched a 2-hour movie, your memory of the movie is identified or you recollect it through moments. And sometimes the beginning, sometimes the end are really critical. So if the ending is bad, the movie ends up being bad. It spoils the whole experience. So this idea that moments are combined together to help you summarize your experiences or shape your experiences. And that's something that we're also doing in buildings, is we're constantly creating numerous moments. And the more pleasant, happier, better moments that you create, the larger experience becomes better. Next. So something that's quite fascinating is that what scientists have discovered that is 95% of the time we operate subconsciously. We're not conscious of what we're doing. We walk around, we move around. I mean, I personally experience this when I'm driving. I take a call while I'm driving, and then I realize that I've reached my destination. I think I don't remember passing all the 6 signals and all the cars that I overtook, but I did all of that. And because that's how the body operates. We're 95% operating subconsciously. Next. So Ty Farrow in this book, and he's given a nice couple of lectures, which I highly recommend architects to watch. He says architecture is salutogenic, if I got the word right, which is basically health-inducing. And he says there's no neutral space. Every space either has positive or negative impact, or has some impact. And there's nothing that exists. There doesn't exist a neutral space. Next. So I think conventionally we think that the emotion is thought, but emotion is not just thought. Emotion is a combination of physiological changes that happen in the body. And sometimes they're triggered subconsciously, and then all sorts of hormones get released, and then you're sometimes conscious of your feelings. So yeah, as I mentioned, postures release hormones, and they create feelings. Sunlight has an impact on three hormones in the body, which make you feel good. So in some sense, everything that you see around you is triggering you in different ways, and it happens subconsciously. So in some sense, in every sense, the environment has a huge impact on what we feel and think. And there's this idea that there are mirror neurons. So if there was an experiment where they found that when the monkey saw another monkey lifting a hand, the first monkey's visual cortex and motor cortex got activated. So basically, the parts of your head that get activated when your hand moves get activated when you see somebody else's hand moves. And that's essentially why we feel empathy, that you see somebody else crying and you start feeling sad. Next. So what this all comes down to, and the attempt that I was trying to make with this last-minute compiled presentation of mine, was the significance is in some sense to bridge the gap between architecture and education. And what studies have shown is that, so this was an experiment in which mouse lived in normal cages and then enriched environments. And the ones that lived in enriched environments had a lot more neurons, a lot more neurotic connections. Their intelligence was higher. They had less chances for anxiety, less chance for addiction. And it is a huge amount of effect that environments have, or enriched environments have on people. Next. And so with the education, we know that there's a lot. There's multiple engines. Education now is not about content and facts. It's about social skills, dispositions, 21st century skills, about creativity, confidence, mindfulness, critical thinking, discipline on one side. And we've got a huge amount of literature available about how you can inculcate these and train these in people. And there's a lot that we know in child development and human psychology. Next. And on the other side, there's a lot that we know about the relationship between the environment and people. And in some sense, this conference is about, next, bringing them both together. And next. Yeah. And I'm going to conclude with a small brief, next. A couple of lines from the premise of the conference. The spaces we use have a great impact on us as individuals and communities in terms of how we feel, think, and behave, and therefore how we perform as organizations and societies. Our relationships with objects, people, and values are affected by the spaces we use and how they are configured with respect to each other, both at a city and individual building scale. Our educational institutions, both as organizations and buildings, are highly consequential in enabling us to shape and transform society for the better. Developments in environmental psychology and cognitive neuroscience not only reveal the tremendous impact that the built environment has on our physical and mental health, but also demonstrate how enriched environments can inspire, stimulate, and allow humans to thrive and excel. While it should have been obvious that our habits are affected by our habitat, the idea hasn't truly been accommodated in the design of most buildings we use on a daily basis, thereby sometimes making our buildings work against our own aspirations. It is my hope that at the end of the day, we will have a much better understanding of how education, school buildings have an impact on each other, and together we could make a much better difference. Thank you.